Have you ever wondered why love, the very thing we crave most, can make us feel powerless? Why, the moment you finally let someone in, something inside you trembles as if your freedom is slipping away? It's as though intimacy, that sacred closeness we're told to seek, secretly threatens to undo us. And perhaps it does, because to truly love is to dissolve the illusion of control. It's to step naked into the mirror of another soul and face what you've spent years avoiding, yourself. In the depth of human connection, Carl Jung saw not romance but alchemy, the burning fusion of two unconscious worlds colliding. When a woman opens her heart, she is not merely offering affection, she is opening a gateway to her shadow, the unspoken parts of her psyche that ache to be seen. Yet the paradox is cruel. The more she loves, the more she risks awakening her deepest wounds. The very hands that hold her can press upon old scars. The tenderness that comforts her can expose the child within who once wasn't safe to be held at all. Intimacy feels like surrender because it is, not to the other, but to the truth. And the truth is that no one can enter love without first confronting the ghosts that guard its door. Every glance, every silence, every act of closeness becomes a mirror. In him, she begins to see her father's distance, her mother's longing, her own reflection distorted by years of emotional armor. Love becomes less about union and more about recognition. The terrifying realization that what we seek in another is often what we've disowned in ourselves. The lover archetype lives in every woman. She is the pulse of passion, the fire of devotion, the instinct to merge and be known. But when the lover descends into darkness, she becomes addicted to the very pain she wishes to escape. She confuses intensity with intimacy, desire with destiny, possession with connection. She loves until she disappears. She gives until she's empty. She waits for him to see her, not realizing that he is only reflecting the parts of her that remain unseen within herself. And yet, she returns, again and again, to the same fire. Why? Because deep down she knows that love is the crucible of transformation. The lover in darkness is not weak. She is brave enough to touch what most people run from. She dives into the underworld of emotion, where ego dies and truth is born. But until she learns to love without losing herself, her heart will always feel like a battlefield. In the eyes of Jung, intimacy is not merely connection between two bodies. It is the sacred dance of anima and animus, the feminine and masculine energies seeking wholeness within the psyche. When a woman meets a man who evokes her deepest emotions, it is not just chemistry. It is her unconscious calling her toward integration. He becomes the carrier of her projections, her hopes, her fears, her unhealed father wounds, her hunger for validation. And unless she becomes conscious of this exchange, she will mistake psychological merging for love. Have you ever noticed how the one you love most can trigger you the deepest? That is not coincidence. It is design. The unconscious uses love to draw out what is hidden. The lover in darkness begins to awaken when she realizes that every heartbreak is a lesson in self-reclamation. The pain of attachment is the soul's way of saying, "Come home to yourself." For true intimacy does not begin when you merge with another. It begins when you no longer fear being alone. Still, surrender feels like death. The ego fights it, terrified of vanishing into someone else's gaze. We're taught that to yield is to lose power, yet Jung reminds us, where love reigns, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, their love is lacking. The lover must learn to balance both, to love without domination, to give without dissolving, to feel without drowning. That is her spiritual task, to turn surrender into sovereignty. When she begins this inner alchemy, something changes. Her love becomes less desperate, more divine. She no longer seeks to be completed but to be mirrored, not consumed but expanded. She understands that the purpose of love was never safety, it was awakening. To open your heart is to let the universe carve you into someone capable of compassion. To stay open even after betrayal is to become vast. That is what the lover in darkness learns, that pain is not punishment, it is passage. And as she surrenders, not to a man, but to her own, unfolding, she discovers the freedom she once feared losing. The paradox of love is that you only keep what you no longer cling to. True intimacy does not bind, it liberates. It asks you to stand naked in your truth and trust that what is real cannot be taken away. The lover in darkness is reborn in that moment, no longer a seeker of validation, but a creator of light. When the lover begins to awaken from her sleep of dependency, she realizes that the fear she once blamed on love was never about the other person. It was about exposure. To be seen in one's emotional nakedness is to stand before the mirror of existence without disguise. Every mask she wore, the seductress, the caretaker, the pleaser, begins to crack under the weight of her own authenticity. And beneath those masks, she meets the trembling child who once learned that love must be earned, that affection was conditional, that safety depended on compliance. This is where intimacy becomes sacred work, because what we call falling in love is rarely falling into another. It is falling into the depths of our own unconscious. Each embrace reactivates an old memory. Each silence recalls an old rejection. What she thought was chemistry might be repetition, the psyche's way of recreating the familiar, even if the familiar once hurt. Jung warned that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And so, she repeats the cycle, drawn to men who withhold, who mirror her own self-abandonment, who make her feel what she's never healed. Not because she is broken, but because her soul is determined to be whole. There's a reason why intimacy feels both intoxicating and terrifying. In the presence of true closeness, the ego begins to dissolve. The walls we've built to protect ourselves from pain become prisons that also keep out love. When someone's gaze lingers too deeply, the inner defenses shake. The lover in darkness feels the tremor between pleasure and panic. Part of her yearns to merge, another part screams to run. The dance of attachment and avoidance plays out like a ritual. The push and pull between desire and fear, between the longing to be seen and the terror of disappearing. Most women are never taught that love and fear often share the same breath. They confuse the rush of anxiety with the thrill of attraction, the unpredictability with passion, the ache with depth. But true intimacy is not chaos. It is calm. It is the silence. Between words, the peace of being known without performance. To reach that place, the lover must cross through her own darkness, through shame, through grief, through the illusions that once made her feel unworthy of stillness. She begins to see how the feminine heart, when unhealed, clings to potential rather than presence. She falls in love with who a man could be, not who he truly is. She nurtures his wounds while neglecting her own, believing that her empathy can save him. But this is the shadow of the lover, the savior impulse born from the wound of not being chosen. The more she gives, the less she feels. The more she waits, the more she fades. Her devotion turns into self-erasure, and what was once love becomes servitude dressed as loyalty. Yet awakening does not come through cynicism, but clarity. One day she realizes that to love him deeply, she must first love herself enough to no longer disappear, to remain in her body, her truth, her boundaries, even when desire pulls her toward dissolution. That is when the alchemy begins to reverse. Love no longer feels like drowning, but like breathing underwater. It no longer demands surrender of the self, but surrender of the illusion that she was ever incomplete. Jung understood that the feminine path to individuation often travels through the corridors of relationship. The lover's heartbreak becomes her initiation. Each ending, each rejection, each betrayal strips her of a false identity. She learns that no man can give her the wholeness she has not yet claimed. In her solitude, she begins to touch the essence that no mirror can reflect. The lover who loves because it is her nature, not her need. Still, the pull of old patterns lingers. Shadows do not die easily. The unhealed parts whisper, "You're safer when you're chosen. You're worthy when you're desired." But now she recognizes the voice. It belongs not to her truth, but to her conditioning. The lover in darkness no longer bargains for affection. She witnesses the manipulation of her own mind and steps back into presence. The love she offers now is not a plea, it is a gift, and when she gives it, she no longer bleeds. In that state, intimacy transforms. It ceases to be surrender to another and becomes surrender to life itself. She lets go of control, not because she's weak, but because she finally trusts her own resilience. She sees that love does not destroy her. It reveals her capacity to survive the breaking. Each fracture is a doorway into greater depth. Each goodbye is an echo reminding her that her worth was never contingent on being held. So she no longer fears the fall. She walks into love with open eyes, not to be completed, but to be mirrored in truth. She no longer hides her intensity, her longing, her vulnerability. They are not flaws, they are flames. And the man capable of holding her will not be the one who dims them, but the one who burns beside her without fear of being consumed. There comes a moment in every lover's evolution when she realizes that what she called connection was often a transaction of validation. The ache to be chosen, to be seen, to be held, these were not expressions of love but echoes of unmet needs from a past that never learned safety. And so she mistook intensity for intimacy, believing that if the fire burned bright enough it must be real. But passion without consciousness is a wildfire, beautiful for a moment, devastating in its aftermath. True intimacy, she begins to understand, is not found in merging but in meeting. Two sovereign beings standing whole, unmasked, unafraid to be witnessed as they are. Jung called this the conjunctio, the sacred union, but warned that such a union cannot occur between halves. Only those who have faced their own shadow can meet another without trying to consume or be consumed. Love, in its truest form, is not a possession, but a recognition. The quiet knowing that the soul before you mirrors your own divine complexity. And yet, before she can reach that awareness, the lover in darkness must confront the architecture of her fear. She begins to see that her body remembers what her mind has long buried. The moments she learned that vulnerability was dangerous, that surrender meant pain. The nervous system, wired for survival, still flinches at tenderness. The heart closes before she even realizes it, wrapping itself in silence, pretending to be indifferent. But beneath that armor lives the same longing. To be met, without manipulation, to be held without condition. This is the paradox of the modern feminine. Strong yet starving for softness, independent yet secretly yearning to be understood. And it's here that many women confuse empowerment with detachment. They close off to avoid being hurt, mistaking numbness for strength. But the lover archetype cannot be silenced without consequence. Suppressed passion turns into apathy. Repressed tenderness hardens into cynicism. She becomes the woman who controls everything but feels nothing. To heal, she must reclaim the parts of herself she once exiled. The sensual, the emotional, the tender, the intuitive. She must allow the lover to rise again, not as the desperate maiden seeking to be chosen, but as the conscious woman who knows her love is sacred energy. This time, she gives not to be valued, but because her essence is value. The lover reborn understands that love is not a strategy, it's a state of being. And so she begins to practice what Jung called holding the tension of opposites. To love and not lose herself, to desire without attachment, to surrender without collapsing. The modern world teaches women to armor up, to negotiate love like a contract. But the lover in darkness knows another way, the way of stillness amid longing, of devotion without dependency. She understands that intimacy is not the absence of boundaries, it is their graceful embodiment. When she meets a man now, she no longer projects divinity onto his imperfection. She sees him not as savior, but as mirror. His tenderness reveals her capacity to receive. His distance reveals where she still clings. She no longer blames him for what he cannot give. Every relationship becomes a lesson in consciousness, a mirror reflecting her inner weather. And when conflict arises, she no longer spirals into self-blame or resentment. She breathes. She observes. She chooses response over reaction. This, Jung would say, is the beginning of individuation. When the feminine consciousness stops orbiting around others and begins to anchor in herself. Love no longer means dissolving into someone's world, but allowing two worlds to coexist in harmony. She learns that true connection doesn't demand sacrifice of identity. It requires the courage to be authentically seen. The lover in darkness begins to glow differently now. Her beauty no longer screams for attention. It hums with serenity. Her presence disarms not because she tries to seduce, but because she radiates wholeness. The men who once sought to possess her now find themselves humbled, confronted by a woman who cannot be owned. Her energy speaks of freedom, and in her gaze, one senses both depth and distance, compassion without captivity. But this serenity did not come cheaply. It was forged in heartbreak, shaped by loneliness, refined through silence. She had to learn that love's truest purpose is not comfort, but expansion. Every wound taught her how to keep her heart open without bleeding out. Every loss taught her that detachment is not indifference, it is faith in divine timing. Every goodbye revealed that endings are not failures, but recalibrations of energy toward alignment. And now, when love comes again, she meets it with both softness and discernment. She no longer needs to chase, to prove, to perform. She knows that real intimacy cannot exist without emotional responsibility. To be touched by her now is to encounter presence itself. Still, aware, unafraid. She has learned that to love deeply is not to surrender her power but to express it. For she finally understands. Surrender was never about losing. It was about remembering who she truly is when she no longer hides. There is a silence that follows awakening, not the silence of emptiness, but of depth. The lover who has walked through her own darkness no longer seeks noise to feel alive. She understands now that intensity was never the proof of love. Presence was. And in that stillness, she feels something sacred returning. The quiet pulse of self-respect, the warmth of emotional stability, the subtle hum of inner power. The world once taught her that love should consume, that surrender meant losing ground, that vulnerability was weakness. But she has come to see that real surrender is not collapse. It's expansion. It's what happens when she stops fighting life and begins flowing with it. To surrender is to stop performing, to stop forcing outcomes, to allow love to unfold in its own rhythm without trying to control its tempo. In that letting go, she discovers a paradox. She feels more powerful than ever. Jung spoke often of the union of opposites, the reconciliation of shadow and light, feminine and masculine, love and fear. The lover in darkness embodies that alchemy. Her heart is no longer a battlefield between needing and denying, between clinging and withdrawing. She has learned the language of both energies within her, the masculine clarity that sets direction and the feminine trust that allows flow. She moves through life with both grace and precision. not because she tries, but because she no longer resists what is. The woman who once feared intimacy now realizes that the terror she felt was not about the other person's presence, but about her own absence. She had abandoned herself in the name of love, and that abandonment had turned intimacy into imprisonment. Now, she guards her presence as a sacred flame. When she gives her energy, it is conscious. When she opens her heart, it is not an act of desperation, but of discernment. The lover reborn understands that real intimacy is not two people losing themselves in each other, but two consciousnesses meeting at the edge of their individuality. It is not fusion, it is resonance. It is when two beings, both whole, both awake, both self-owned, choose to intertwine without dissolving. There is no addiction in it, no hunger disguised as passion. There is freedom, there is breath, there is light. But, even in her awakening, she knows that shadows will return, because shadow is not an enemy to be slain, but a rhythm to be danced with. Each time she falls in love again, the old patterns will whisper. The difference now is that she listens without obedience. She can feel the urge to chase, the fear of rejection, the temptation to shrink, and still, she stays rooted. She does not exile her shadow. She embraces it, for she knows it contains her most potent power. Her relationships transform in this awareness. She no longer measures love by attention or reassurance. Instead, she looks for emotional depth, for presence, integrity, peace. The men who once excited her chaos now feel shallow to her. She's drawn not to intensity, but to stillness, not to the thrill of uncertainty, but to the quiet of emotional maturity. She knows that chemistry without consciousness is the illusion that once burned her. And in this knowing, she no longer sees love as a destination, but as a mirror. Every connection, fleeting or lasting, becomes an opportunity for refinement, an invitation to return home to herself more deeply. Love becomes her teacher, not her captor. Every heartbreak becomes a revelation. Every disappointment becomes a path to freedom. The lover in darkness no longer resents the past, she thanks it. For without the darkness, she could never have recognized the light. This is the moment when she becomes magnetic, not because she seeks to attract, but because she embodies an alignment. Her energy no longer screams for validation, it whispers peace. The kind of peace that unsettles those still addicted to chaos. The kind of peace that draws men not through seduction, but through serenity. They sense in her something rare, a woman who no longer fears being alone, and that is her power. Detachment, not as armor, but as clarity. To love without grasping, to desire without demanding, to stay soft in a world that rewards hardness, that is mastery. It is the state Seneca described as tranquility of soul, and what Jung would call individuation achieved. A woman who has faced her own unconscious no longer needs control to feel safe. Her very presence commands respect because she respects herself. So when intimacy comes to her now, it no longer feels like surrender. It feels like remembrance. The soul remembering that love was never meant to cage her, but to open her. That the heart was never meant to be protected from pain, but strengthened through it. That surrender was never about bending to another's will, but returning to her own essence, unburdened, unafraid. She has become the embodiment of divine paradox, soft yet unshakable, open yet grounded, loving yet free. The lover in darkness has found her light, and it shines not because she sought to be seen, but because she finally sees herself. And so she smiles, quietly, like someone who has remembered something ancient, something the world once made her forget. The woman who knows her worth, doesn't chase, she chooses.